Well, welcome everyone to this August 2025 Cybernetics Live. Uh, I am Peter Tuddenham, Vice President of the Cybernetics Society, and delighted to be hosting my first Cybernetics Live in this new role that I have. And I'm equally delighted to welcome Dr. Rose-Margaret Ekeng-Itua from many parts of the world, but currently in California, who has a PhD in cybernetics, has had a really interesting life so far, and we had some wonderful conversations as a previous to getting this organized today. And she is going to tell us a little bit more about her life and particularly her work now in human-computer interface and how she's evolved her work since getting the PhD in cybernetics from Reading. So, Rose-Margaret, wonderful to have you here today. And if you'd like to share your screen, we'd like you to say what you want to say here today. And then we'll have 30 minutes or so from you, and then we'll have a chance for conversation after.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, for your kind introductions. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep, that's good.
perfect. And then, yeah.
Slideshow.
Okay. So, first of all, I'd like to say a very big thank you to Peter and Miguel and the entire Cybernetics Society for inviting me to give this talk. Cybernetics is a pretty niche field. And oftentimes I would feel a little lonely. I need more cybernetics people. So when Miguel reached out, I was like, yes, I found my people. So it's really great to be in company of like-minded individuals. Well, my name is Rose-Margaret Ekeng-Itua. And like Peter mentioned, I am in California in the USA, and I'm an engineering professor in California. I have been in California for, I think, over 12 years. And prior to that, I was in England. So I'm also a Brit. But I'm sure you can sense a little accent that is not completely British, not completely American, and that's Nigerian. So I'm a true global citizen. That's what I call myself. And when people ask me where's home, I'm like, pick any part of the world, and that is home for me. So today I'm going to be talking about interface design, AI, and the challenges around that. I know that when Miguel reached out, one of the things he really wanted me to talk about is my experience and just talking about equity in the field. And so I'll be roping some of that into the work that I do around human-computer interaction and user interface design, but particularly really contextualizing it around Africa. So, agenda for today, introduction. I'm going to introduce myself and just set the stage for the conversation or the presentation shortly. And then I'll talk a little bit about fundamentals of cognition-based user interface design or user interaction, which is really going to be the main bane of my discussion, just talking about cognition and what it really means and how that influences user interface design. And you'll see my own interpretation of cognition. And then just basic design strategies to enhance cognitive interaction, again, based off of my research on different models and models that I tend to use for cognitive interaction or user interface design. And then how AI integrates with all this and the challenges that we face with AI-driven cognitive interface design. And of course, we'll talk about all the glories of AI in user cognitive design, but of course, setting certain guardrails. So when thinking of how do I introduce myself, I don't like talking too much about me. But my background, like I said, is in electrical electronics engineering. I got my engineering undergraduate degree in Nigeria and then came over to England for grad school. And so I did my master's in mobile and satellite communications from the University of Surrey in Guildford, and then went on to do my PhD at the University of Reading, where I got my my PhD in cybernetics. I also worked at the University of West London for 8+ years as a senior lecturer there in electrical electronics engineering. So taught there at the university before moving over to the US to do the same thing as a professor of engineering here in California. In my conversations with Peter, we were just talking about our lives, and I shared with him that, yeah, when I was younger, I lived in Switzerland, grew up there, spoke German, couldn't speak English. At a point, I could only speak German, Swiss German. And so, like I said, I really count myself as a global citizen. And all this experience has really should I say pigeonholed me or really forced me to really consider some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. And I'll just let the word out there. The word is culture, how we consider culture, cultural context, cultural sensitivity in our user interface design, and how AI can actually enable us to include that in a more intentional and strategic way. So that's my introductions. I would like to get to know people a little bit too. So would be great if we could put in the chat our names and our backgrounds and where we're calling from. So if you're from UK or which city or county. So please, let's put in the chat. And while we're doing that, introducing ourselves, your name, where you're dialing in from or joining in from, and your background. Yeah, what I mean by background is your work background. Okay, so we're going to get right into the presentation, and we're going to start with fundamentals of cognition-based user interface design. Now, some of the things I'm going to be talking through are pretty basic theories, but I'm going to be contextualizing it around the research that I've done and the experiences I have had personally in the area of user interface design and what I teach my students around user interface design. So, well, the basics of user interface design, especially when it's cognitive-based user interface design. As we all know in cybernetics, if you're designing user interfaces, cognition is key. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, but in my pursuit of my PhD, I had to really do a lot of studies around neuroscience, around cognition, around social connectivity, etc. And so based off of that, these are the three main areas that we really need to understand when we're talking about user interface design and really focusing on cognition. First of all, user perception. How does the user perceive information through different sensory inputs? And how does that shape the understanding and how they interact with the device? Then memory interaction, memory and the interaction. How does their interaction with the user interface really help the user with recall, with remembering certain experiences? And then that would also improve usability and efficiency, because research has shown that when users are emotionally connected to an interface, they will have enhanced usability and enhanced and improved and optimal efficiency. Now, how does the interface also afford the user to effectively solve problems? Because most users are using interfaces to solve problems. Yes, we might think, no, it's not problems, it's just leisure or entertainment, or they're just doom scrolling. Well, even doom scrolling on social media is solving a problem, whether a problem of loneliness or a problem of searching for information or a problem of needing validation. So in whatever sphere we look at user interfaces, they are all solving problems. So how do our user interfaces are designed to enable the user complete the task that they want successfully? Now, if we look at these three categories, they're all tied to culture. They're all tied to culture. But oftentimes in our user interface algorithms, heuristics, we miss out culture. which is really key. In the past, we were missing out culture because it was really expensive. We thought it was really expensive to gather cultures from all around the world to really give the user proper, customized, culturally sensitive interfaces. Later on, we're going to talk about how AI is revolutionizing that. But user perception is all about culture. Memory interaction is all about culture. Problem solving is all about culture. Now, another theory that we teach in user interface design are just basic principles of cognitive ergonomics. First of all, minimizing memory load for our users. How do we intentionally design our user interfaces to minimize memory load for our users? Now, I give you an example. Say in Africa, we have a user interface that was designed in the West and is having lots of different words. For example, you'll be surprised, apple. How many people on the continent in Africa eat apples? But then there's a user interface that has apples or words that really are not relevant to that particular culture. That is information overload. That is memory overload, because the user now needs to start straining its memory to start making connections for things that they had never experienced, for things that are not even in their short-term or long-term memory. User interfaces design needs to minimize this. Facilitating learning, a proper user interface design should be intuitive to the user, and it should not require the user to start going through another reference guide or reading up a manual. And that's really one of the reasons why the iPhones have stood out, because they're one of the most usable phones in the world. I think Steve Jobs set the standard for usability in terms of mobile interface design, because he just wanted it to be intuitive. The user needed to learn intuitively without any additional reference. But how are we really ensuring that users can learn, can facilitate their own learning without necessarily going back to a reference guide, etc., especially in cultures outside of our cultures in the West? Error prevention and recovery, how to incorporate systems that will really help the user mitigate errors or fix errors and not get frustrated. Again, all of this has to do a lot with culture, context, and situational awareness. We need to really start looking into our user interface ergonomics principles that we teach to ensure that it incorporates, sorry, I'm having a little technical issue, yes, that it incorporates cultural context and situational awareness so that we ensure that our users' experience is optimal. And I'll give you some examples later on as we carry on. Another concept that I think is really important in user interface design is just the role of human factors in interface development. Usually we think about the physical aspects, which will inform how the user really interacts, whether it's touch screen or now augmented reality systems, and also the cognitive factor, which is what I'm kind of really focusing a lot here, and the emotional influence. Usually in the past, we have just used a cookie cutter approach, which is how we have experienced the world in the West without consideration of other cultures. My experience, I think, being a child growing up in Switzerland, in Europe at a very young age, moving on to Africa, going back to England, and then coming to the US, has really helped me see all the various cultures in the world, but again, how technology has not adapted to cultures and how technology kind of forces various cultures to assimilate, and as such does not optimize the learning experience or the interaction experience or the human-computer interaction experience of the users globally in various different parts of the world. And for me, I think this needs to change, and that is what I push. in my classes, and I teach my students to be global citizens, because data has shown actually that the next couple of years, I think that 1 in 10 folks will really be from the global south, what we call the global south, and not the global north, or 18 out of 10, not 1 out of 10, about 8 out of 10 people will be from the global south. So once again, singing like a broken record, culture and situational awareness. We need to incorporate that into our interfaces. At the start, probably I forgot to kind of reference or really describe what I mean by interfaces. By interfaces, I just don't mean like our touch screens. I also mean like voice interfaces. So when we communicate with Alexa, or we communicate with any chatbot using voice automation, that is also an interface. So we need to consider this entire interface definition in the work we do, because, okay, great. There you go. She talked. Sorry. I've got Alexa here, and I just mentioned her name, and she said, I don't understand what you're talking about. So pardon, I'm not sure if you heard that, but that was Alexa real life. So we've got to consider culture and situational awareness in our designs. So I would like us to also put in the chat, and I'm going to give some examples now, and then would like folks to put in the chat what you consider as some examples of user interfaces that you think did not consider culture, have not considered culture or situational awareness, or some that are not culturally sensitive. I will give you some examples. Copilot, I think, is fantastic, and maybe that is an example of a good one. So let me give you an example of ones that are not really, really sensitive. I'll start with one that we have in the UK. So not just talking about places outside of the UK, in the global south. Ryan's Air booking system. I mean, I like Ryan's Air, but the issue there were hidden fees, pre-selected options, and the design pattern were not really clear. The impact there was loss of trust, user complaints, etc. And they had to learn a lot of lessons to fix their user interface design. Another example of user interface design that does not consider cultural awareness is just in color symbolism misuse. In some parts of the world, red is used as to indicate errors. So in the global north, for the most part, the UK, the US, when we use red color, it's like, oh, that's danger, that's an error. However, in many African cultures and areas outside, red is actually used for mourning. And so if one uses red, it's like, oh, are we mourning here? And so those sort of color symbolism creates miscommunication and emotional disconnect. And when we're designing user interfaces, that is one of the last things we want to do to create any emotional disconnect from our users. We want our users to be emotionally connected to the work that we do. So those are just some examples that I've got, but I'd like to hear what others have to share. And I have to go to the chat now. Thank you for the introductions. Okay, so voice recognition. Thank you, Margaret. That's great. So voice recognition still struggles with mixed accents. Great, excellent. Thank you very much. So when Alexa came out initially, I was super excited when bought the Amazon Echo, and I would say, hey, Alexa, play XYZ. It would not understand me. But then my kids that now have American accents.
But here is other music by XYZ.
Sorry, Alexa is interrupting this. Alexa, stop. This is great. I should have thrown her out of this room. No, put her outside. But then when my kids would prompt her to say something, they have an American accent, she would hear. So, Margaret, I completely agree with you. Just understanding mixed accents, cultural sensitivity is not there. And predictive text really anticipates your words too. Yep, I completely agree. I get that. Okay, Paul. Okay. That's that very old sketch about the Scottish voice recognition. Yes. Thank you very much, Paul and Margaret, for those, and Miguel, language alphabets, absolutely right. So lots of different, I mean, we could have an entire session on cultural insensitivity of our user interfaces. And we've got to change that as we continue designing and wanting our users to engage more with our interfaces. Yes, situational awareness. Thank you, Elena, for that. Situational awareness, proving one is not a robot. Yep, with letters, don't distinguish between upper and lower cases. Yep, I completely agree with you. Auto subtitles. Thank you, Ian, for that. So great contributions. And I mean, there's a plethora of this. So the question for us as cybernetics practitioners, as members of the Cybernetic Societies, what are we going to do about this? How can we push the envelope and create the change so that we have more folks? Because I think our aim is really to get people emotionally properly connected with technologies that will support them. I say that the reason why I went into cybernetics, because it was a field that really showed me a clear path on how we could actually use technology to advance humanity. That is what cybernetics is all about, and that's why I pursued it. And so how are we going to advance humanity via all these interfaces by increasing cultural sensitivity so that we make technology equitable for and inclusive for every single person around the globe? And that is what our aim, my aim as a cybernetic practitioner is, to really ensure inclusivity and equity in this. And for the first parts, I use cultural context. There are lots of other contexts that we can use, gender, etc., etc. Okay, so thank you everyone for the participation in the chat. That's great. So the next part that I just want us to talk about a little, I'm going to share just design strategies for enhanced cognitive interaction. And while I do this, I'll give some great examples of changes I've seen in the work I've done and just in my day-to-day interactions with our interfaces. So first, one of the key strategies is, of course, cognitive interaction. And when we talk about cognitive interaction, we've already talked about what that means: user perception, user memory, user problem solving. So, and all that has to do with culture and situational awareness, cultural sensitivity, and situational awareness of our systems. So we've got to ensure that we have effective and relevant information architecture. So when we're designing our user interfaces, what is our information architecture? Is it relevant? Is it sensitive? Is it appropriate to the culture that we're designing it? Our information architecture needs to be adaptive. It can no longer be static. It's got to be dynamic to meet the needs and adapt to the needs of the people in various cultures to ensure that we're optimizing their experience, reducing cognitive load. Sorry, that was load. Reducing cognitive load for our users. And we've talked about this already, and also supporting users in decision making. Wanted to share a model, and this model is one of the models that actually continue to used it in my PhD work and continue to use it. Is the unified theory of use and acceptance of technology. So this model, and it's an adaptation, my own adaptation of this theory, really spells out the different various ingredients, various components of a user that needs to be considered if we want a user to accept and use our technology, including user interfaces or whatever technology that exists. And we can see here, a whole range of different facets of a user. But one of the things I really want us to draw on is social influence, which has to do with culture, facilitating conditions, which has to do with culture, performance expectancy, which has to do with culture. And all these really are key in influencing behavioral intention and how the user uses the interface. So again, just emphasizing the importance of culture, and we can break culture further down into facilitating conditions, social influence, effort expectancy, because effort expectancy varies amongst cultures, performance expectancy. So just wanted to share this as one of the models that I continue to use in my work in user interface design, especially to ensure adoption and acceptance of technologies. Another model that I use, and this is an adaptation that I created from lots of various models that I researched, is just really to consider all these different facets and context when we're talking about context awareness, that we've got to consider all these different contexts. And I could spend an entire hour or two just on this, but I won't, because Peter told me, keep this short and sweet, 30 minutes and you're done. So that's why I'm speeding through this a bit. But this also has to do with context awareness, and all the different facets we've got to consider. Even infrastructure, socioeconomic context, we've got to consider that. So if we're building an app, a user interface app for a region with low bandwidth, Wi-Fi bandwidth, low internet bandwidth, that is totally inappropriate because the users will not use it. So some countries on the continent do not really have the luxury of having high bandwidth speeds and infinite amounts of data. Data is pretty expensive. And so if we're designing apps or user interfaces for apps that require high bandwidth, that will not work in those regions. And there are lots of different contexts, historical contexts. Again, we could spend forever talking through this. But again, all this has to do with cultural and situational awareness. And that is why I am quite excited about AI. Despite all the issues we have, I think AI is actually going to help us fix this lack of cultural sensitivity or situational awareness, because AI is adaptive and can learn within the cultures. So it's important that we have personalized and adaptive interfaces using AI. And that's the beauty of AI, because in the past, as cybernetics practitioners or human-computer interaction practitioners, our argument was always, it's so expensive. How can we reach out to all the various cultures in various geographical regions to really understand all this, understand cultures, and ensure that everything is adaptive? Well, AI is here to help us with that adaptation. And I think as practitioners, we need to embrace it, of course, with caution, because AI also has other things which I'll talk about. But AI is here to really support the AI-driven adaptation that we need, because AI can help adjust interfaces dynamically. Again, like we said, no more static interfaces. We need to have dynamic interfaces that are culturally sensitive and situationally aware. And that can match user behavior and preferences for enhanced interaction. So I'll give an example of my experience with Copilot. I love Copilot, and I think I like the work that Microsoft is doing. I'm not here giving sales speech on Microsoft. They're not paying me for that. But just my interaction with Copilot, I was just playing around and thought, let me see if Copilot understands what we call pidgin English in Africa. And it did. I spoke to it, and it started speaking to me in pidgin English. Also spoke another language that is almost extinct on the continent. And this language is not even on Google Translate, and it understood it. And so it is adapting, and I've programmed it in and said, these are the languages I want you to communicate with me in. And Copilot, my AI agent, and my AI assistant on Copilot are really working with me within the realms of those languages and adapting the things I do within those languages. And so that is a big adaptation. But compared to Alexa, Amazon, Alexa does not understand Pidgin English. Alexa does not understand EFIC. And I mean, in some of the work I do this comparative analysis of interfaces that are culturally sensitive and those that are not. But those are just an example of one AI-driven system, Microsoft Copilot. It is adapting, it is culturally sensitive, and situationally aware, more than the Amazon version or even Google's Gemini. Okay, personalized user experience. AI can actually help with this and increase user experience and ensure equity and inclusion with user interface design. And then I'll soon be wrapping up. Also, AI-driven user intent recognition. AI can actually help just from user interaction analysis, predict user intent, and help respond in a more culturally and situationally aware manner. It can also predict user intent and also proactively create content for the user in a culturally responsive manner that will not now trigger memory overload. Remember, when we're designing cognitive-based user interfaces, we want to avoid user memory overload. And so this is where AI can really customize, create proactive content delivery that minimizes overload and really helps facilitate learning and problem solving situationally with situational awareness. Again, AI is great for real-time feedback. We also mentioned that a cognitive-based optimal experience or user interface for a user needs to be able to give real-time feedback and be an intelligent assistant to avoid frustration. When users are using interfaces and they start getting frustrated and they feel misunderstood, that is not okay. So AI, good culturally sensitive AI like Copilot can actually help with real-time feedback and intelligent assistance to minimize frustration and help users with their tasks. Now, just wrapping up, yes, I love AI. Yes, I'm advocating for AI because as a cybernetic practitioner and a user interface or HCI practitioner, I feel that AI is here to really help us create the culturally and situationally sensitive experience for users, and as such, create more equitable technologies and more inclusive technologies. However, we've got to put some guardrails. And I know I might be preaching to the choir here because you're all aware of these various challenges that AI introduces. One, user data protection. We've, of course, got to ensure that we increase user data protection and user consent is important. I think we're making inroads and making progress around this, and great work done in the EU. I think the EU is more advanced, or England and folks in Europe are more advanced than we are here in the US for various reasons. But we've got to really look at this and also addressing AI bias. Yes, we talk about culturally sensitive, but we've got to make sure that AI still doesn't have those biases, and then even increase inequity and increase lack of inclusion. So we've got to watch out for that too. Also, interpretability and transparency of AI systems. We've got to ensure that AI user understands AI, and the language we use to design our AI systems or even interfaces are clearly understood and they're not complex, because it should be an assistant. So my assistant should not really be making life more difficult for me. But sometimes I think folks have a really steep learning curve with AI. So we've got to break that barrier down. And then, of course, transparency to build trust and informed user choices. It's got to be based on user choice. And then lastly, we've got to really balance automation with user control. And again, singing the praise of Microsoft, they did not pay me to give the shameless plugs for them. But the other day I was just working on Bing, and Bing is actually giving me control of what I want to scroll and actually paying me, whether it's with little credits. It says, hey, if I use Bing to search, I will get this credit, I'll get that credit. So the fight we've been fighting for a long time, where it's like, why are the Googles of this world, etc., the search engines, using our information and making money without giving us back our share of the money? Well, I was pleased to see that Bing is starting. I mean, yes, they're not there yet, but starting to at least give me credit. If I use Bing to search for 10 days, I think I'm going to get a $5 Amazon gift card. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, high time to pay me back for my information. This is my data. And so we've got to really push more for that as cybernetics practitioners in the wake of AI. We've got to ensure that users have autonomy, or users also are paid for their data. And then just having overall effective automation that really includes the user decision. So overall, in conclusion, because this had to be a quick 30-minute presentation, cognition-based user interfaces are where we should be heading towards when it comes to user interface design. And again, when I talk about cognition, I'm talking about cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, situational awareness. And we need to ensure that we integrate AI to ensure the adaptation that we need for our users. And that's one of the things that I said. I'm thrilled about AI. It can actually help us to have improved responsiveness, personalization, and usability of digital interfaces for our users. Of course, we always have a note of caution. We've got to really ensure privacy and figure out all the control challenges that AI introduces, and put policies in place to protect our users. And I'm sure that with this, we will have a more equitable, inclusive user interfaces all around for everyone around the globe. And also we will optimize user experience and help our users and help people really become more advanced using technology, which is really what we do in cybernetics, to optimize user experience and user ability. Well, that is all for now. Thank you very much for listening. You can email me. Those are my email addresses. Feel free to reach out. I've got another one for the college, for the university I'm at, but these are my personal email addresses. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation offline.
Wonderful.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, Rose-Margaret. That was a wonderful overview of the whole field, I think, and you've raised a lot of challenges for us there. And I would, gosh, go in any one of a number of different directions, right? As a cybernetician or a cybernetics practitioner or a cybernetist. But I do think we have a responsibility with our knowledge of cybernetics, as you rightly point out, to encourage development in all the ways that you've suggested. And I do hope that you can join the Cybernetics Society, and I think you said you would, which is wonderful, and then help us think about how the Cybernetics Society can make a contribution to all of this. And so let's have some questions. There's a few thoughts in the chat. I think if we could use the raise hand effect in Zoom at the bottom of the screen, that would be helpful, and we could go that way. So who would like to step forward? Angus has put a couple of comments in the chat there about thinking about other ways as looking about how we bring this into nature. But there's Abdul. He's got his hand up. So over to you, Abdul. Do unmute and please ask your question.
Sorry, I'm just checking Miguel wasn't first. Oh.
No, well,
cool.
on my screen.
No worries. Hello, Rose-Margaret. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. you made me reflect on being a developer way back when we thought about usability and accessibility, doing web design and whatnot. I'm just trying to reflect on the situation as a cybernetician and trying to think, well, what is it that we're doing here? We're trying to keep the interface simple, and I'm thinking of Steve Jobs here, so that we can complexify ourselves, for lack of a better word, to the real task. And at first, that feels like a bit of an apparent paradox. So I just wanted to test that as a bit of logic to see if that makes sense. And then what does it practically mean? And I've got another angle as well. So I have a neurodivergent child, and my wife is also neurodivergent. And I thought that's an interesting perspective as well. And it probably relates to culture as much as anything. And I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that. So yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Abdul. First of all, I'll start with your theory of the paradox, and I completely agree with you. It is a paradox. We want to simplify the interface, but again, at the back end, there's layers of complexity there. And it is a paradox, and I guess that's why we're cybernetic practitioners, because we are experts with those sort of paradoxical dilemmas. And then with regards, thank you for mentioning neurodivergence. I actually wanted to mention that and forgot in my excitement, because the cultural and situational awareness is really for neurodivergent individuals. I work in the neurodivergent space in terms of just working on grants to support students that are neurodivergent to get into technology and engineering. And one of the ways that I've really seen AI really supporting neurodivergence is really incorporating AI in user interfaces. And I think that is really one of the areas that is really going to grow and make really, really broad impact. So neurodivergence is really an area that we need to really look into and create those cultural and situational awareness. Yeah, and I mean, there are a couple of tools that I know, and I'm sure you also are aware of, that have been created for neurodivergent individuals, to just enhance or support and assist the task that they want to complete.
Brilliant,
And
thank you. I'll share the link of one. There's one called Goblin Tools, which I also use myself, which is quite handy.
okay.
Especially when you get an awkward sounding email, you can just double check that it is truly awkward, or you're not having a bad day. But I'll share that on the chat with others as well. I find it quite helpful. I think it's helpful for all of us. But thank you, Rose.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
thank you very much, Abdul. Yeah, great. And later, I'd like to hear about what people think about the paradox that Abdul just, suggested. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Miguel.
Yeah, so I love to dabble. I'm actually a Gemini fan, but I love to dabble with all the large language models out there and to keep up with it. And I know there's a lot that's been done from the visual perspective as well, of visual AI. But when you mentioned that Copilot was so good at pidgin English, the first thing that came to mind was your previous comment about the color red. And I was thinking, I haven't tested it, obviously, but I would imagine that large language models are simply not aware that red has a completely different meaning in various parts of the South. And so I wonder what we would need to break out of that sort of like text box to something that's much more aware.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel, for that question. And yes, large language models, for the most part, are not aware of the color symbolization with regards to cultures and religions, etc. And I think that we're beginning to make strides with large language models with image recognition. And I think once we get there, then we can really start introducing that. But again, that is why it's important that we as practitioners really push for that. Because even if it's image recognition, I mean, now we have large language models that if I have a flower, I do a little bit of gardening and I really don't know what sort of flower I'm planting. And I take a picture and upload it and it tells me, yeah, this is the flower, it will grow, it's a perennial plant, blah, 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 blah. And so I think we need to be intentional about actually introducing into our large language models cultural and situational awareness. So I think the technology for image recognition is there's no intentionality around cultural and situational awareness into large language models. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Margaret.
Hi. Around the red issue of red, which is very, very interesting because in some languages, in some African languages, you don't have certain colors, but you will have something like the color that is the color of the sky at this time of the day, at this time of the season across this kind of a landscape, which is very nuanced and beautiful. The other thing is that men and women perceive color, just the actual cognitive perception of color is different between the genders. And very likely there are cultural, perceptual differences too, if we could do the research. So that would be interesting. However, I noticed that you and I both use our hands a lot. And so does Miguel when he's talking, which is very much a sort of South behavior, right? And Italian, if you want to be Italian too. But I'm really wanting a lot more gestural interpretation and intelligence built into something, and I believe that that's coming. But what can you tell us about the sort of distinctions that are starting to happen around gestural interface?
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret. Yes, I use a lot of gestures. Yes, very Southern.
Lovely.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So I think with the birth, should I say birth or acceleration of augmented reality, we're having more gestures that are going to be embedded in interfaces. Because augmented reality, virtual reality is all about gestures, really enhancing the user immersion into the interface. And so I think Meta here is doing a lot of work around that. Google is also doing a lot of work around that. And so we're going to be seeing a lot of gestures. There's a lot of work also that has been done with what we call American Sign Language, which is the British Sign Language there, just to recognize gestures for people that are hard of hearing. Here in the US, we say the deaf community. And so that has really pushed the frontier with gesture recognition. And I think we're going to be seeing that a lot more because oftentimes in the South, part of our communication, part of our conversations are gestural. And so we're really missing out on the full experience. And I really love that you brought that out. And again, those need to be introduced into large language models if we really want to optimize experience and cultural awareness and sensitivity. Thank you. That's a great one. Yeah.
Wonderful. Fabian.
Yes, on the issue of like visual communication, one of the things I was looking at a while ago was Marie Neurath's work in Nigeria, where she was invited by, forgive my pronunciation, but it's not really good, Obafemi Awolowo, when the constitution of the Nigeria is being made in the 50s, the same time that McCarthy was coming up with artificial intelligence in America. And he used the term artificial intelligence. He said in one discussion that he didn't want Norbert Wiener coming along and thinking that he could poke his nose into what he's doing. So he kept it separate from cybernetics for very practical reasons. What Marie Neurath was using the isotope approach, which was based on hieroglyphics, so that regardless of the language that was spoken, you could have images which could be readily understandable, which was a way of presenting particularly the work that Marie did with her husband Otto Neurath in Vienna, creating a museum that had that spoke visually, so that somebody could come in and not speak a word of German could understand it. I don't know how much of Marie Neurath's work, if it's still recognized in Nigeria, but I found that quite interesting in terms of a period of the introduction of new constitution and how she was employed to help work on posters and inform people of how different governance structures worked.
Hmm.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much, Fabian. Thank you for the history and taking me down memory lane in the 50s in Nigeria. I guess maybe that was way before my time. But I think, I mean, your point about just using images more than text, I think other folks have brought that up, is super, super relevant. I mean, my mom would always say an image can tell the story of 1,000 words. So I think as we move forward in AI and cybernetics, and I see AI and cybernetics as being together, I think cyberneticians should really push the frontier for AI, because that's bang with technology usability and adaptation and acceptance. And actually, there are quite a few museums here in the US that are really beginning to infuse AI and that visual experience. I think I was talking about augmented reality. And so the museums now are really using augmented reality for you to have a full immersive experience of the artifacts that are being exhibited in the museums. And I think some will even take you back to the country where the artifacts came from, and you have a full immersive experience. Yeah, but thank you very much for that point. Yeah.
I wonder about the role of the Cybernetics Society. We've been having some conversations of late about where the Cybernetics Society should go or could go, and even how the Cybernetics Society presents itself. And obviously I've moved the website from one position to another, but it's certainly nowhere near where it could be as a representation of who we are. And walking the talk is always a challenge, isn't it? And so this is an invitation to everyone who's turned up today to contribute their thoughts and ideas to me about how the website as one interface design could reflect all of what we've just been discussing. And I've just been introduced to isotypes and the issue of color, which I had a sort of small understanding of. But I mean, obviously in China, red is a color that's associated with weddings and abundance and so on. So how we then build an interface, that is visually appealing. And obviously it's in English. The Cybernetics Society is in England, but England has multiple accents, as we've seen. Anyway, I'm just brainstorming here, but I mean, I would love your thoughts, not today necessarily, but over time, Rose-Margaret, about what we can do and how we can at least do a little bit to be sensitive to all the issues you've brought up and the issues that have been raised in the questions. And I would welcome everyone's sending me an email, vp@cybsoc.org, with any thoughts. Thank you for the stimulation on all of that. It's I'm now reading up about isotypes, and I put something in about colors. I like to go off and quickly find what I can if it's relevant. Margaret, have you still got your hand up, or have you got another question? Because you're on the top left there.
Thanks. I have a question. Could you give me perhaps 3 very specific differences, cultural differences in your experience, let's say European, African, North American? Could you give me a sort of feel for I mean, because I'm aware of the bandwidth issues and the language variations and tones and rates and tempos and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll do a juxtaposition. I'll just call it global north and global south. So Africa and the global south, and then the global north. In terms of user interface, I mean, mobile phones are prevalent in Africa. Yeah. The other day I was doing a comparative study, and it seems like the same number of people, or the penetration rate in Africa is the same as in the US. Just studying user interface design on mobile phones and user interfaces in Africa, on the continent, a lot of sound alerts are needed. So here we tend to turn off our notifications, and it's interesting, though there are bandwidth issues, but everyone wants a sound, more auditory,
much more oral culture.
Yes, a much more oral culture. That's the word. A much more oral culture. And so more sound, that is what people go for. Whereas here, we're kind of more text to a certain extent, and maybe
more
images,
visual.
more visual. But in Africa, it's a lot of oral, and
very interactive, much more interactive.
And you find that pretty much almost, I mean, yeah, we've got lots of what I call community of practice or social networks, but in Africa, there are more social networks. And there was actually a study I did on that. And so mobile interfaces need to be interfaces that immediately allow for social connection, social networking, community of practices to get together, because it's embedded in the African societal fabric. Connections and meeting.
Very much so.
Yes.
There's much less of this solitary stuff, isn't there?
So those are the key differences. I mean, initially that stand out. And so considering those in interface designs is important.
Interesting. Thank you.
Angus, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very much. And
can't hear you, I'm afraid. You need to speak up.
I need to speak louder or
much louder.
some other way?
Yeah, that's getting better.
Okay. Hang on a minute. Let me go to ordinary.
Can't really hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. I really appreciated your presentation, Rose-Margaret. And I'm coming to this meeting not as a sociologist, because if I was a sociologist, I mean, I could have been coming as a sociologist, but what I'm choosing to present as myself is not as a sociologist, but as a cybernetician. So I'm very interested in all of the examples of diversity in the social environment, but the question arises, how do we approach that when we come to AI? And I put in a series of topics that I thought were interesting and would expand beyond the time available. But I know two things. Firstly, that there is an overall characteristic of technologies generally, especially screen-based technologies that we interact with, that they denature human beings in their relation to the world, so that we substitute a narrowed, reduced density of experience. And in the process, we create an urbanized culture which distances us from nature. And there are many tragic consequences at the moment in terms of what human beings are doing to nature. So how do we forge forward with AI so as not to do that? And the related question is, what are the fundamental principles that we ought to be thinking about when we design AI in order to address this? For example, the ability to customize a screen, a web screen, according to the person who was coming on board, has been around for 30 years. So you could, each person as they were recognized, you could change the screen completely depending on who they were. And AI could do that very much more. There are various fundamental, so the question then becomes, what's the fundamental thinking about how we design it? AI was distanced from the machine learning of cybernetics some decades ago, and has been developing a theory around a kind of an enclosed conceptual circle. But cybernetics has lots of areas, some of which go back to biological theory like Umwelt, some of which go into things like perceptual control theory of Bill Powers, which I think is very powerful and relevant here. Others to do with just the basics like Ashby and requisite variety. So if you apply those principles, then you start thinking differently. So the question I'm asking is, can you tell us anything about how the fundamental cybernetic theories are in practice being applied into the design of the AI systems and the way they work?
Okay, sure. Great question. Very layered question. I appreciate that. So AI on its own, I think dating back, part of my work in my PhD was neural networks. So when people talk about AI now, I'm like, okay, this thing has been around for like forever. We used to call it neural networks back in the day, pattern recognition, etc.
Yeah, I used them.
Yeah, you used it exactly. So now it's just that we've got processors, chips that have more higher computation power, and that's why we're having AI right now. And so for me, just going back to the basic fundamentals and principles of cybernetics, like you mentioned, I think that AI pretty much is a study of the human brain, and that is biology, and how all our synapses are connected and how those networks are connected. AI is all about memory, recall. It's all about our perceptions, and all those are being fed into what we call large language models, which we all know. And so I do not see any delineation, in my opinion, between cybernetics and the basics of AI. I think that the basic concepts of cybernetics, which you've just mentioned, really have been the basic principles that have informed the algorithms and the large language models that AI has been created, has been used to create AI. Now, a way that I think we could even better improve and really, really introduce more of the basics of cybernetics into AI is by creating small language models that are even more customized for different aspects of things we do. So, for example, my AI, I've created my little chatbot. That's my small language model, and it understands me. It understands my sleep patterns, and it's there to trigger, okay, hey, Rose-Margaret, this is your sleep pattern. It understands my biology. It understands that my parents had diabetes, and okay, it's helping me with my meal plan, etc., so I do not get diabetes, etc. And so I think that we can actually embed the fundamentals of AI, whether it's the biological concepts, the ergonomics concept, into small language models that will actually enable more human user optimization. Not sure if I answered your question in various ways.
Well, Angus is actually on the Cybernetics Live agenda for next month, and so maybe Angus, you can bring some of this into your presentation. While you presented those thoughts and question, Angus, I wonder how much our whole tradition of sort of separating man from nature, which is this overarching problem that we don't consider ourselves to be a part of nature in essence, leads to this sort of separation of thinking of how technology and humans are separate from nature rather than being a part of it. And that sort of fundamental position kind of just manifests itself in design thinking and systems think. I mean, even the term system thinking gets me going because, you know, we're a system being, you know, and it really, I think we have a responsibility to, you know, to follow Gregory Bateson's lead and thinking about mind and nature and our whole embedded, we are nature, and that has to, somehow we've got to get that into the design function of the AIs. And I love your solution about local AIs. I mean, I'm looking forward to when I might be able to buy that NVIDIA machine that allows me to create my own what I suppose I don't like the term digital twin, but maybe something along those lines? Is that what you're thinking? I mean, how can we bring in a sort of viable system model way it down to the lowest level of autonomy and decision making? That's what I would like, so that I know all the words and images that are used in my language model. Anyway, I don't know. That's a little bit of a ramble, Rose.
Yeah. And also just wanted to mention, I mean, one of the things, thank you, Peter, for that. And thank you, Angus, for your questions. One of the things that inspired me to go into cybernetics was Professor Kevin Warwick. I'm not sure if you all know him. He was my first PhD supervisor, the first human cyborg. Kevin Warwick is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the claim is he was the first human to have a chip implant that would communicate with digital devices in his office, and he did this a long time ago, and that was cybernetics. I mean, like Peter mentioned, I do not see it. The aim, in air quotes, I think, of the cybernetics I did my PhD in, is that there's no differentiation between man, nature, and technology, that we become all one in a very streamlined manner. And in a manner that does not adversely affect the other. That technology does not adversely affect man, man does not adversely affect technology, and none of us adversely affect nature, which is the world. And I think that's the beauty of cybernetics. There are lots of other examples, which I think I'm soon running out of time for, but I look forward to Angus's presentation.
Yeah, good. All right. Okay, Margaret. We can hang on here for another little while, Rose-Margaret, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Perhaps till 1/2 or a bit before, depending on how the questions go. Margaret, Ian's got his hand up. Okay.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, Ian.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Rose-Margaret, first of all, thank you. And the reason for saying thank you for me is that I'm working right now on a major project with a global community of evaluators who evaluate things according to the blue planet, which is the things that we do, how do they impact the blue planet? And I find myself working with different cultures around the world. And I've been shocked to realize that I can say something which in my culture is completely innocent and well-meaning, can be deeply offensive in another culture. And rather than building a bridge, it puts a chasm between us. And the idea of being able to, I like the notion of transduction when you're communicating. You should transduce, you should deliver the energy and the meaning of what you're trying to communicate into another culture, into another language, such that it arrives as it was intended, rather than inadvertently creating a major problem. And the insights you've given, I'll speak for myself, me personally, about how AI, we're using AI right now, but in a relatively simple manner, but how AI might help to do that and generate a global community that understands each other and that resonates with each other and actually addresses the major issues that we have in the world together. Together as a meta view of the polycrisis that we all face. So thank you, Margaret. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you, Rose-Margaret. Forgive me. Very deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate that. Yeah. And yes, I like the word together. And that's what I believe AI can help us do to solve this problem together. And I'll give a very, gosh, maybe it wouldn't be appropriate to give the example here. When I moved over here from the UK to the US, and I said to one of my friends, hey, mate, should we go down and get a coffee? They're like, what, mate? Mate? No, I'm not your mate. I'm like, wait. I'm like, Jesus.
Yeah.
So I had to quickly change that. In the US, mate means something else.
Oh, yeah. There's, the English language is its own worst enemy in that respect. I mean, certainly, I can. Some of the fun we shared a little earlier, wasn't it? It was sort of our experience with the same word meaning totally different things. Yeah. I noticed Elena's put a hand up. Elena.
Well, I'm actually, I appreciate all that we've been talking about culture, but what concerns me is how AI can be misused. A friend of mine yesterday recommended a Rachel Maddow YouTube, and I didn't follow up on it, but today she said it was AI, it wasn't her. And I'm concerned about, if you can do that with a public figure, you could do that with pretty much anybody. And this one apparently was skillful enough, unlike the one with AOC a little while ago, that my friend couldn't tell the difference. How do we, kind of keep a certain amount of veracity in what's portrayed, particularly when we're talking about public discourse?
Thank you very much, Elena, for that great question. It is the problem of the hour. And I have to say, I don't have a solution. There are solutions that are being built, but it is a very valid problem of the hour, having deep fakes, what we call deep fakes. That is a huge problem that has created another realm of AI practitioners that are sniffers, what we call sniffers, to actually sniff out the deep fakes and determine, hey, this is a deep fake, do not listen to this. But very valid problem indeed. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. And maybe in a year's time, I might have some solutions. Right now, it is a problem. We've got to fix it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, seeing no further hands, I think I probably could draw this to a close.
I think Margaret's waiting to come in, actually, Peter.
Oh, did she, Margaret?
Oh,
okay,
yeah. There are a few tricks you can use to try and look for the deep fakes. First of all, what I noticed on some of the deep fakes that are coming out at the moment, if you look at the logos of the alleged channel, you can sometimes spot it's not quite the same logo. Sometimes you will see that there are spoof video channels on YouTube, for example, where they're all produced by the same bot factory, if you like, and alleging that these well-known figures are saying the things that they're saying in these various forums. But if you look, you can often see they'll do silly things like use the same logo architecture on their channel stuff. So you can look for signs like that in the actual image. The other thing you can do is look at tone of voice and facial expression. And something in your human brain will tell you something's not right. There's just not enough variety in the muscle movements of the fakes yet, or tonal variation, or change in the way the lips move for the type of sound that the person is making, or the facial expression for the words that they're actually saying. Then you can also look at how much the body moves. And a lot of AI, there's very low variety body movement, body signaling, completely out of the norm for a normal human being. So you can sort of go and look at a couple of authentic videos of the person that you like to listen to a lot. And then you can go and actually see if you can detect feature differences. So that there are these tiny little tells which you can train your mind to look for. But one of the simplest one is just looking at the actual alleged logo design. They very often give themselves away. So, there's a very well-known political international theorist at the moment who's out there talking a lot about Ukraine and Russia and so on, and America, etc. And, he's been advertised across many, many channels, but most of them are actually fake. And when you look at the little logo design, they've even done one for Sky News, for ITV, for so on. But when you go and look at the actual logo of the authentic channel, it's not the same design. So you can tell tiny little things like that, just on basic interface design, if I can put it in those terms. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that's helpful for me, because I deal with deepfakes. And you're absolutely right. I think just their tonal variety and all that, and their facial expression, that's lacking for the most part in deepfakes, although, yeah, it's hard. But
So
thank
more
you.
variety in our movement, I think, is
Yes.
sort of the thing to do, right? More gesturing, and so that it's more difficult for someone
Yes.
to deep fake you. Lovely, rich conversation, and I look forward to carrying on this and welcoming you to the Cybernetics Society, Rose-Margaret. Again, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you all for coming today, and look forward to the next Cybernetics Live next September with Angus. The information's on the website, and the registration link will be up there a week or so beforehand. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank-
you. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you.